Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to your town of Lincoln, and thank you very much for coming. I'd like to call the special council meeting of January 7, 2019 to order. There's quite a few of us here this afternoon, and so I'm going to read this safety notice. In the event of an emergency, please evacuate council chambers to the nearest exit, which is here, through the council chamber doors, and obey all instructions given by the clerk. I would remind council members that that applies to us as well. I would advise that we stay in our seats until the public have vacated the room, and follow instructions as they're provided to us. If you need assistance, please see the clerk. Would be either of these ladies, clerk, deputy clerk, in the front of the horseshoe. And once you've evacuated the building, please gather in the front parking lot outside of Town Hall. And I see out there that there is a sign that's in the northeast corner. I've forgotten what it says on it, something like, please stand here. But there's a mustering area out there, so if you're accustomed to that when you were going to school, this is exactly as it is. Also, to advise you that the Town of Lincoln Committee and council meetings are posted on our YouTube channel. I want to thank you for coming this evening to this public meeting and remind you that there are rules of engagement. Please be respectful while others are speaking, and please refrain from clapping, mostly because it doesn't have any impact on the decision of council, and it does disrupt the flow of the conversation, which is very important. The delegations will have 5 minutes to speak, and I ask that you stay focused on the agenda item alone. My name is Sandra Easton, and I am the mayor of the town of Lincoln. At this time, and for the first time in 2019, I would like to read the land acknowledgement. The Shenochtin people have called these lands home for thousands of years, and more recently, the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee have been sharing the land as one dish, one spoon treaty territory. We would like to acknowledge the enduring resilience of the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people who call this territory home. At this time, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to introduce each of the council members, and I will start on my right with Councillor Diane Regima, who is the Deputy Mayor as well as Ward 1 Councillor. Councillor Adam Russell, Ward 1, Councillor Tony Brunet, Ward 2, Councillor John Pachariva, Ward 2. On my left, Councillor Paul McPherson, Ward 3, Councillor Mike Mikulik, Ward 3, Lynn Timmers, Councillor Lynn Timmers, Ward 4, and Councillor Greg Reimer, Ward 4. On my left is Michael Kirkopoulos, our Chief Administrative Officer. Carrie Beatty is our Senior Communications Advisor in the back bank here. Paul Diani, Economic Development Officer. Andrea Chambers is my Executive Assistant and the CAO's Executive Assistant. I don't see her at the moment. In front of me from Corporate and Legislative Services, we have Julie Kirkelos, the Town Clerk, on my left, and Trish Sarnicki, the Deputy Clerk, on my right. And Rebecca McKay in the back bank, Legislative Coordinator. Finance Administration is represented by Angela Safani, the Director of Finance and Administration. Greg Hudson is our Fire Chief. Planning and Development, we have Kathleen Dale, the Director of Planning and Development, and Matt Bruder, the Associate Director of Planning and Development. From Public Works, we have Dave Graham sitting in the gallery, the Director of Public Works. And from Community Services, we have Shannon McKay, the Acting Director of Community Services, and Sarah Ain, the Acting Associate Director of Recreation, Culture, and Special Projects. Thank you all for attending. Councillors, are there any declarations of interest? There being none, we move on to delegations. Ladies and gentlemen, we have 3 delegations this evening. Please note that each delegation may speak for a maximum of 5 minutes, and the time will be kept by the clerk. Our first delegation is Luke Tucheri, Simple Vapes Plus and Simply Cannabis Inc., and he will be coming forward to speak on item 5.1, PD-01-19, Cannabis Retail in the Town of Lincoln. Mr. Tucheri, please come forward. Would you like to introduce your
Yes, of
colleague?
course. My name is Luke Tucheri, and this is my colleague Brian Barbadero. Good day, Mayor Easton, councillors, everyone here this afternoon. On behalf of Simply Vapes Plus and Simply Cannabis Inc., we would like to state that we are in support of and recommend that the Town of Lincoln opt in for cannabis retail sales, as being considered with item PD-01-19 cannabis retail in the Town of Lincoln. My colleague Brian and I have prepared this quick presentation, as well as any questions. We can answer any questions if they're permitted to do so afterwards. I'll begin with the safety reasons I'd like to point out on this matter. The most important reason of all reasons is no admittance into the store, nor any sales to minors under 19 years of age, as opposed to black market selling to all ages. Regulated and safe cannabis, as opposed to dangerous and potentially laced with lethal substances black market cannabis. It eliminates the customer base for the black market, thus eliminating the street dealers. The brick and mortar stores and the sales are provided with information from government-trained, knowledgeable staff, unlike lack of info or incorrect info from black market dealers. You get precisely what you're after, as well as an understanding of dosages, which is one of the most important aspects of this. You understand the differences between things like THC and CBD, the sativa and the indica, the edibles, the smoking and the vaping, and much more entailed with that. The information benefits consumers of all ages, including elderly citizens whom require more assistance and guidance and whom have a very difficult time with online ordering or product information. It's what the community wants, the statistics saying it will outperform and displace alcohol and spirit sales. Legal cannabis retail will actually increase the public safety. That would be done by the regulations, which require many cameras, alarms, tracking of the camera footage, as well as a vault for the cannabis inventory, which has to be built to specific regulations. Financial reasons. You will bring consumers in from surrounding towns, especially any which may opt out, which in turn will shop at other retailers in town, including gas stations, the LCBO, the beer store, groceries, and many more stores that are in this community. The cannabis retail store could easily see 500 plus customers a day, which amounts to a lot of money into the community. This would be the reverse if the community is opted out. Imagine all the citizens driving to the Costco complex on 50 Road in Hamilton to pick up their cannabis. They'll purchase gas cheaper at the Costco, which is normally 10 cents a liter cheaper. Groceries you can get cheaper while you're there. The LCBO for your convenience is also there. All the money would leave the community, Lincoln and Beamsville, at a rapid rate, in our opinion. The first mover advantage is important in this case because it will develop the outside communities wanting to come in for those purposes. And on top of that, we have a thriving wine industry here, so the two can merge definitely. First mover, we would create a vibrant and healthy culture, and it's an accepted culture which is gaining worldwide momentum. Legal reasons. Reasonable access means there are no significant geographical, economic, or social barriers created by the government to limit access to the citizens. The citizens deserve the exact same access to cannabis as they have to alcohol and spirits. It is very discriminatory to offer alcohol and spirit sales only to ban legal cannabis sales in the exact same locations within a community, especially with our current knowledge of the benefits and greater level of safety on the cannabis compared to the alcohol and the spirits. I'm going to give Brian some
we're running
time
out of
now.
time. Thank you. Appreciate that. Hi, sorry. I just wanted to touch on the retail end of it. With a store here, it's going to contribute to the downtown improvement plan. It will provide jobs and taxes for the town. We also are leasing space in the downtown core. It would also add benefits to information, as Luke mentioned, for anybody considering or getting into cannabis use, which is growing at a rapid rate. I just wanted to mention as well, Mayor Easton, you have built this city for 4 years now, and as a place to prosper, a place to grow, and a place to belong. And I believe this industry, we believe this industry, it will much benefit your ideals and your step to making this town great again.
Thank you very much, Brian. That's the end of your time, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
All right, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to send you off because there may be questions. That was just for your presentation.
Yeah, if there are any.
Any questions from council, councilors? Councilor Patrick, I'm sorry, Councilor McPherson. You'll have to understand, councilors, I want you to know that when your number comes up, your name isn't assigned to it. It's very difficult for me to tell who it is, so you have to bear with me. So Councilor McPherson, that's going to change.
Okay, thank you, Madam Mayor. And thank you, gentlemen, for your presentation. So I believe today is the day that applications are accepted. Did you apply?
We have applied, yes.
Okay. Okay, and tell me a little bit about the age of 19 and how you manage that as far as, it sounds like they're not even allowed, anybody under 19 is not allowed in the store.
No, there will be a strict photo ID enforcement at the door, kind of like a bar. As legislation in years progress, that may not be necessary, but at first that will be the illicit use. It'll be first scanned at the door, and the counter desk clerk, if you can picture a pharmacy, walking up to a pharmacy and saying, "I'm waiting for my prescription," they will again check your photo ID before you are able to purchase your. Oh, and you can touch on that. Sure.
Yeah, and the government themselves are actually making a program that's similar to the Smart Serve card with the alcohol. And that is going to be implemented and has to be taken by everyone involved that's working at the store, that's working at the portion of it that would be selling. So there is a government protocol that will be mandatory to abide by, and that would come with some form of training by the government or a third party that's approved by the government to move forward with that matter.
The financial impact on selling to underminers or properly not following procedures is detrimental and pretty much would cost you your entire business. So we take that very seriously and have no plans to do anything that regulates that.
Good, good. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you.
Thank you, through you, Madam Mayor. Just a quick question on how you, in the store, how you would plan to actually merchandise the cannabis, and also maybe a little, if you were to get a license and we were to opt in, a couple of maybe thoughts on how you would market and to make sure that you aren't marketing to minors or trying to attract minors. Some of those little maybe fail steps to ensure that doesn't happen.
I can answer both those questions. The easier one, I believe, is the second one. Is pretty much near zero in terms of advertising allowed, which is also limited to the storefront. basically limited to, as far as I know, it'll say a name, such and such cannabis is pretty much as far as your advertising seems to go. I don't believe we can do anything further than that, including pictures and all sorts of things, or sending out flyers or anything of this sort. So, yes, as far as we know, that's not allowed. That there's laws in place for that right now, and I know there's steep fines that if you fail to follow those regulations. So the advertising is, as far as I'm concerned, zero will be available. The first question, actually, me and my other colleague have traveled. We took a day trip to Alberta on purpose to visit the legal dispensaries that have opened there October 17th, to also help develop with ideas. And we found the best answer to the cannabis, because it's not allowed at the point where you can just have it out anyways. It's restricted to being in locked containers, a little bit of each quantity and not many of them.
You can picture a Tylenol bottle or an Advil bottle, looks very, very similar.
So what they've gone,
Safety lock, all that.
yeah, so basically some stores there you have on the shelves the display of the pre-sent jars of each individual size. But what we preferred was, we seen 2 locations there that had the cannabis was all in vaults, never was brought out, never was put back at night, because at nighttime it always would have to be back in the vault, all of it. So the 2 locations we saw, they came up with a system where on the boards they have all the strains of cannabis divided up in their correct categories, with the people working that have the knowledge of those, and we can discuss the type of cannabis you're after. And then you are simply bringing a card up to the person at the till, who in turn turns around, and there's a window at the vault where she walks to, or he walks to, and you receive that quantity of cannabis that the customer wants, and that's where they pay and leave. So I don't think it's what we have to do. As far as what you can do, I've mentioned, but I think we'd like to go the step where we don't have any cannabis out. It's going to all be locked in the vault, and you are going to see all these postcard 4x6 type pamphlets, which inform them, but the people working will also have the information. So pretty much you won't see any cannabis at our store, other than what you're going to end up leaving with.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Through you to the mayor, through you to the presenters, Mayor. I've been to your store, and it is a nice store. It's very professional, and it's very properly run by appearances. However, like, the fear that myself and that perhaps maybe members of the community would have, similar to a question that Councillor Russell had brought up, is the appearance of the store, is that going to maintain the way it is? Is it going to continue to be like that, or do other stores open up and then it turns into, these pot shops similar to those in Hamilton that are operating currently illegally? What sort of enforcement do you predict or foresee or expect?
Well, thank you for that. Thank you for the compliment on the store. Oh, sorry.
And could you possibly,
Oh.
this interchange that you've had, I think you both understand what you're talking about, but the rest of us don't. So I don't know what you mean. I'm not sure what the councillor means about the appearance of the store. Do you know what that means?
Well, I just think he likes the appearance of the store. Okay, go ahead, sorry.
I would only assume what we are after as a business, and we've seen this model elsewhere through our research, is what seems to be used as the term as like an Apple store. Very professional, full of informative people, very clean appearance, similar to walking into a medical office, clean, very presentable, inviting. Unfortunately, we pre-did what we were asked to do in regulations if we were a cannabis store, and put up the discrepancy color in front of the window. That was kind of trying to pre-abide by rules we didn't have to yet. We would actually wouldn't mind having those off for transparency, because we always welcome everyone to come in and see what our store is like. But I believe that's what he is after, if I'm not mistaken. As like in terms of what you've seen at our store, sorry?
Yeah, this is, Madam Mayor, this is what I've seen.
Yes. And then you want to know if it will
The
maintain that?
concern that I have, the concern that I have as a counselor and a citizen as well is that will the government enforce these regulations that you've mentioned with regards to advertising, with regards to appearances? Because currently, the stores that,
Yes.
you know, majority of us see on TV are similar to those pot
Yes.
shops that are being shut down
Yes.
in Hamilton on a daily basis, where the fines are minimal to the return on profit.
Sure, absolutely. No, we have full intentions of changing the store. The look right now was just basically our first movers to get into the unit and to abide by what we thought were the regulations. As we know, in the last 9 weeks, regulations and legislation has changed probably 50 times. So it's been very difficult for us to keep up with what they're demanding. However, we are up to date, and we are changing the look of the store. The look will be as if you want to picture if you want to picture an Apple store. I don't know if everybody's been to the Apple store in Limebridge Mall, but that is a very, very similar look that we're going after. We took these designs from the trip to Alberta, and based on our beliefs, these are the only stores that are going to survive in this legal market. Once the black market's eradicated and sales slow, illegal grow-ups stop producing because there's no more demand, the stores that will only survive will be the stores that people want to shop in. They tell us that now, yeah. They don't want to go into VCT tiles on the floor and a guy with a beard serving them cannabis. They want suit and ties. They're demanding professionalism, and they're demanding knowledge. This is what the consumer is demanding, and this is what we will provide for them. As far as the look right now, we do have some sketches and drawings. We did forward them to some council members previously. But if to give you a visual, you can picture the iPad store, the Apple store, professional, clean, like Luke mentioned.
I think you're more concerned with what'll keep it that way, or if there's any things in place to make sure that things don't become, I guess, like the stereotypical horrendous place to go to. And I don't think that there's much even anyone can put in place of that. That itself will come in terms of professionalism and how you want to succeed as a store. I'm sure if down the street from the liquor store there was a shady little place that sold alcohol down the road from a professional LCBO, no one would go to that store. So the LCBO would prevail over that anyway. And that to me is what would keep any business from remaining into a successful picture, because nobody wants that what is available now, but unfortunately that's the only alternative. No one's gone that extra step with an illegal store to make it beautiful, because they're doing something illegal anyways, so you really don't, I think, care about that point, you know.
Counselor, are you satisfied?
I'm satisfied. I'm satisfied. Thank you.
Gentlemen, are there any other questions? Counselor Chambers.
Thank you, Mary Ston, through you to the presentation, presenters, I should say. I have two questions. You said yourself, things are changing daily. There's a lot of unknowns. Still, every day, there's something new coming out. The lottery, that's only licenses will only be going to cities and towns with a population of 50,000 people. So just want to put that out so people are aware. My two questions are, one is around security. When your store is closed or when the store is in operation, what kind of security measures are you going to have in place? And the other question I have is around your product. Where will you be securing your product to sell within the store? We have cannabis production facilities within our town. Will they be providing their product to you to sell in the store?
Catch me if I missed something. I think the supply end, as far as I'm aware, Up Cannabis, who I believe is down the street, they would still be sending their cannabis supply to the OCS, where in turn is where we would get it from. It would be one shipment from the OCS. As far as we were told, even on the AGCO webinar the other day, we are only able to set certain prices for sales, but from one place that the cannabis will come from. It'll be all from the OCS, from all of the legal suppliers all across Canada. And the portion on the safety for the cannabis itself, the regulations, we were happy in one way to see, but it is quite expensive. The vault that's required to be built to get the license to be able to get the government seal to put on your door to open the store. It's quite a design. I don't have the actual regulations on me, but it's got to be built with steel. The entire store has to be monitored with cameras that have, they've changed it from 60 to 30 days of recording. Everything has to be able to be seen on those cameras, including you have to have even evidence if the safe or vault was even slightly tampered with and not even successfully gotten into. So the government or AGCO, whoever will be responsible, anytime they want to see footage, even any protocol on destruction of any cannabis has to be made with 2 individuals always on the camera and kept for the 30 days.
All right, very good, thank you.
Counselor? Sounds to me like it's similar.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Through you to the delegation. So a number of my questions have been answered by my colleagues, but just to put things in perspective, maybe for some of the people in the audience. So Simply Vapes, you've set up on Ontario Street here, and you've been open for how long? You opened the doors when? November the 1st. So obviously, the lottery is opening up today, and we've got a 48-hour window, and there'll be 25 lotteries, or 25 retail franchises given licenses by Friday of this week. But as we've already discussed, it's for municipalities 50,000 and over. So you've been in business since November the 1st. So what's keeping the doors open right now? What are you selling to your customers?
Okay, thanks for the question. Actually, we've been quite shocked, and I think through also my reading and research from the past, I think you can compare it to when they talk about the gold rush, and the most money in the gold rush wasn't made by those searching for the gold, but those who sold the picks and the axes. So as soon as we opened our door, the first month alone, we broke even with just the selling of cannabis accessories. And actually, we've had wonderful success with the information we've been able to provide, which was free, of course, for all ages that was necessary for plenty of them to move forward. And lots have come from doctors' offices and such, still lacking information, which they were happy to come and see. So between the information, that doesn't make us the money, but we're happy to do it. But the cannabis accessories, you'd be shocked. We were shocked the first month without advertising, because that was just going to be there at the original intent, hopefully till April, but that's not the case now. But it's given us means to be happy enough to now move forward with maintaining that store and putting a little bit more into it. And we've been discussing those things with the community that come in the last week, since we've got our curveball we were 2 days away from throwing in our application. So yes, so to answer to your question, we've broken even, and that was without trying. So the cannabis accessories, I believe, will be able to carry us through to where we have to go. And you're also allowed to sell cannabis accessories through the cannabis store once you are or approved. Thanks.
Thank you for that. So I just wanted to kind of set the tone for my next couple of questions. So in terms of moving forward, obviously the Ford government has basically said the reason they're curtailing the number of retail to 25 at this time is because of a perceived or a real shortage of cannabis. So what have you been told on when, like as ownership, what have you been told from the province in terms of when the next expected lottery for stores is going to come happen? Is it 6 months down the road? Is it a year down the road? What have you been told?
Turn something on? Oh, okay. From our knowledge right now, the Ford government is giving all the townships an option to opt in or out. We believe it's somewhat of a ploy. We believe that the Ontario government is wanting to keep all these taxes and profits for themselves, and the towns that do opt out and want to get back in later, there's going to be a smaller share for you. That's what we believe, anyway. They haven't said anything of that nature. This is just our hunch. I don't know why they would make it so difficult for this procedure. But as far as, yeah, if you want to touch on it, go ahead.
I can only add also as an investor of cannabis stocks and heavily read on that topic, there's many of these LPs, and a lot of people probably that have the stocks in them are waiting for there's many expected dates for their large amounts of grow. Like, for example, Aurora Cannabis at one point in time in the next year or so will reach 750,000 kilos plus. So a lot of these things are going to come online in a year to 2 years. That's probably the expected time for this shortage to get canceled out. Unfortunately, I think some people were just shocked by the demand, which some of us believed was there originally, and a lot of people, I think, weren't ready for it. So yeah, in our opinion, or in my opinion, I would say it's probably going to be a year or so minimum till you hear the next phase.
Yeah, just I want to touch on that. Being a year or so out, it actually is, it allows us to prepare the community, to inform the community, to host all the nights that we were planning to host anyway, women's and cannabis, hemp and health, things like that. So this actually, the time frame is actually very good, considering that the townships that are ready will eventually be the first to get it. So an opt-in will be the first over an opted out community. But like my colleague said, 18 to 24 months, probably, maybe even 12. We're not exactly sure yet.
Councillor, and presenters, I want to make sure that we're staying a little closer to the purpose of the public meeting. So the speculation is really important. I understand, and there's quite a bit of learning, and people are interested in hearing, but I also have to maintain some control over this meeting. Councillor.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just a couple of more questions. I really appreciate the fact that you included the Deloitte report in your presentation. I found that really informative. So just two questions. You've spoken about the process of ensuring that 19 years old or less is going to be checked at the door, and I'm glad to hear that. But obviously, you're going to be in a situation where you're paying rent. Yes, you're selling what you're selling, but you're not going to be selling what you really want to sell. So the edible portion of all this, the Deloitte report speaks that you will not be able to, retail outlets will not be able to sell edibles for the first year. You're nodding your head and you're acknowledging. Thank you. One last question through you, Madam Mayor. You've been open since November the 1st. How many times have you seen a Niagara Regional Police or a Town of Lincoln bylaw officer walk through your doors?
In uniform, never. In uniform, never, and never been aware of one coming in.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Gentlemen, I guess your business plan is your business plan, and the success or failure is up to you, similar to us having 5 pharmacies in Lincoln. Okay, well, I don't have any other questions. I don't see anyone else on the list here, so thank you very much for your presentation. If you would step back now. Ladies and gentlemen, just for clarity, what you saw and heard in the last half hour or so was a discussion on retail only. This was exclusively about retail, because there's 3 different pieces to this that we'll be talking about before the end of the evening. Now, we have second delegation, and our next delegate is Christine Diaz. Ms. Diaz, are you here? And would you like to come forward? And Ms. Diaz is going to speak to item 5.2, PhD or PD 02-19, And this is the interim control bylaw for development associated with cannabis cultivation and production. Completely different matter. Thank you very much for coming forward.
Okay,
You have 5 minutes.
sounds good.
Thank you.
Okay, I figured this out. Thank you, town staff and council, for letting me speak. I'm here today in support of the interim control bylaw PD 0219 to place a hold on any development of cannabis facilities until current zoning and associated bylaws are updated. Without this ICB, there has been and will be an influx of legal, unregulated cannabis grow-ops in the town of Lincoln, with no regard for town aesthetics or the safety and quality of life for the residents. The NRP has noted that these grow-ops are shrouding their criminal activities by using legal marijuana licenses to overproduce, and the marijuana is being sold on the black market. We see this with the King Street West and the South Service Road bus in October in Beamsville, where $13.9 million of plants were seized. Also in September, where the NRP responded to a call where a man was critically shot at a licensed medical marijuana facility in Niagara Falls. Another example is where the NRP responded to a break-in at a licensed facility where masked men held people at gunpoint and threatened to cut off fingers while they loaded marijuana into a U-Haul. That facility was later raided with overgrowing 4,400 plants. These are just a few incidences from our local area. There are many more articles regarding violence and overgrowing. Would you want your kids living beside this? This is the situation my family and other families, if this ICB is not passed, face. There is a facility proposed to be built 40 feet from my son and daughter's bedroom windows. This should not be allowed, but is based under our current zoning and bylaws. Another concern is the odor and light pollution. Take a drive anywhere in Jordan right now and it smells of marijuana. Daily, my kids ask about the dead skunks. It's ridiculous and unfair that we have to close windows and cannot enjoy the fresh air we had only a couple years ago. I am 2 country blocks away from 15th Street and can smell it at my house. I've had representatives from government agencies such as OMAFRA come smell it at my house and say they can't do much. I'm sure everyone has seen the mushroom light over Fenwick in the evenings. It's a clear identifier of the locations, and it's an invitation for crime. That light should be unacceptable, but yet no one does anything. I have never seen light like this from floral or food greenhouses before, and I live right near a few very large greenhouses. The town in Lincoln Sky will be lit up soon if this ICB is not passed. Clearly, the governing agencies do not know how to or do not have authority to control light and odor pollution from these marijuana facilities. So we need this ICB PD 0219 to be voted in favor of until these issues are sorted out. Some of these facilities are meters from schools. What will it take for this to stop happening? I can't even imagine, and we must take action now. This is not agritourism. No one wants to drive by boarded up and fenced off greenhouses where absent landlords don't care what it looks like. Many of these facilities pour concrete over our precious soil that can never be used again. What happens when these facilities fold or go out of business? What do we do with the concrete land after? I have nothing against these facilities, but the safety of our kids and the reasonable enjoyment of our residents and the proper use of our agricultural land should be our main priority. Don't let these facilities run and ruin the town of Lincoln. We need proper zoning, setbacks, and bylaws in place. Thank you for letting me speak.
Ms. Diaz, and I'll now ask the councilors if they have any questions. Any questions of the presenter? Councilor Russell, just a moment.
Thank you. Through you,
Go ahead.
Madam Mayor. Just maybe a little more clarification. What was the feedback from OMAFA or maybe from Health Canada at all when you did talk to them and they came out and tried to smell what you were smelling or what they did not smell? What was the feedback exactly from them?
They really couldn't offer any sort of resolution. It was, I'll log it, send me an email, give me a call. If it did persist a few more times, I was going to be given, I guess there's a next step up with OMAFRA, and I have not been provided that information to escalate that complaint. I was told by Health Canada to walk over to the greenhouse and knock on the door and ask them to turn off their vents. And which I was not doing. And that's really it. It's just a matter of logging the information, giving a call, sending an email to OMAFRA. There's really no, sorry, and I should say, I did receive an email. He did, after a couple months, finally receive a call back from 15th Street, and they are apparently looking into some sort of filtration or something. They are aware of the nuisance, but they're not able to do anything about it. It's my understanding that they don't have filtration or venting, so, but I haven't walked through it.
Okay, all right. Counselor, anyone else? I don't see any other names. Thank you very much, Ms. Diaz. Our next delegate are Joyce and Harold Gallenkamp, and they are also speaking to item 5.2 PD-02-19, the interim control bylaw for development associated with cannabis cultivation and production. Welcome, Mr. and Mrs. Gallenkamp. Please go ahead.
Thank you for listening to us this afternoon. Joyce and I, my wife and I, we live adjacent to the cannabis production facility on 15th Street in Jordan Station. When we moved to Jordan some 20 years ago, it was a greenhouse that grew flowers, and we had no issues with our neighbor. Ever since the operation was converted to cannabis several years ago, life has changed for us dramatically. On a regular basis, we are forced to deal with extremely strong odors of cannabis when we step outside. At times, it is strong enough to be smelled in the house. It has permeated our vehicles, our clothes, and our home. In speaking to our neighbors, some of whom live quite a distance away, this is a major issue for all of us. Despite assurances from the former greenhouse owner, who works as a consultant for the operation, that they are dealing with the issue, there's little change in the odor. In fact, I believe it has gotten worse. The proposed interim bylaw being discussed is a good first step. However, I think more needs to be done. These facilities should be forced to control their odor emissions and be dealt heavy fines for non-compliance. There seems to be a Wild West attitude among some of these operations where the limits are pushed and bylaws don't seem to be enforced. Not only in terms of odor, but also in terms of flagrant failure to comply with zoning bylaws. Setbacks are being ignored as well. I and many of my neighbors implore council to take action and clamp down on these operations, create bylaws, and force compliance. Jordan is a beautiful place. Let's keep it that way and not spoil it for those who live here and those who come to visit us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gallenkamp. I'll now, Mrs. Gallenkamp, did you have anything that you would like to add?
No, I did not. We wrote this together. And
Okay,
he's the
very
one who
good.
read it.
Councilors, do you have any questions of Mr. and Mrs. Gallenkamp? Thank you very much. Thank you. If you would step back. Are there any other persons who would like to come forward? If you would just show me your hands if you are. Very good, sir. Just give me a moment. I have a procedural item that I have to deal with. In order for this gentleman to speak, as he was not registered, members of council, I will need a majority vote, simple majority, to allow him to come forward. Your permission on the citizen's ability to speak. All those in favor? None opposed. Motion is carried. Please come forward. Sir, once the microphone is on, would you please state your name and your address? And you are also limited by the 5-minute speaking terms as well.
Thank you, Mrs. Easton. My name is Tim Conway. My address is 2636 Red Maple Avenue, Jordan Station, Ontario. I didn't come prepared to speak today, but I'm here to support my neighbors on 15th Street. The Grow Up on 15th Street is actually expanding and getting larger by the moment. The odor coming out of that place is absolutely horrendous. I live upwind, okay? When it gets damp out, the smell settles down and you can smell it quite bad. It smells like a dead skunk in the middle of the road is what it smells like. It's getting into your vehicles. You drive to work out of town, you open up your vehicle, at the end of the day, it smells like a dead skunk. Where'd that smell came from the Grow Up. In the United States, the laws are to produce 0 emissions. I do not understand why they don't do that here. That's the way it should be. Our property values are dropping. Our taxes aren't going to change. I think they should. I leave my house on Red Maple. I go to the stop sign. I smell it every day. I turn left, go to the service road by the QEW. You can smell it that whole distance. I come home from work. I work in Port Dalhousie. As soon as I hit that self-service road on 15th Street, you can smell the smell all the way down there. It's ridiculous. The people on Red Maple on the north side of the tracks, from 15th Street down to 13th Street, I don't know if anybody's here, but they actually have the prevailing winds, and they have it even worse. Now, they should actually get on our side too and get a hold of council members and see if we can get something done about this. We have nothing against marijuana growing in our backyard, as long as it's controlled according to laws. And the biggest thing is the smell. The smell is terrible. I invite any one of you council members to come and spend time on our residence. Come on our back deck when we're having a barbecue. We have people over and they say, "What is that? How can you put up with that?" It's tough. It's really tough. And I like seeing progression and success in business. Unfortunately, the fact that this is zoned agricultural, our hands are tied. We can't do a thing. I've been to all the different levels of the government, and everybody is pawning it off onto everybody else. Nobody has an answer for you. I think it's time for the town of Lincoln to step up and pass this bylaw to curb the smell. And like I said, in the United States, it's 0 emissions. It'd be awesome to see if that can happen here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Conway. Just stay there just in case there's a question or two. Councillors, do you have any questions of Mr. Conway? There being none, thank you very much, sir, for
Thank you.
coming forward. And I'm going to ask again, some of you may have had your courage built up after Mr. Conway came forward. Is there anybody else that would like to speak? All right, councillors. Again, I need to see a simple majority. All those in favor of allowing the citizen to speak? There's none opposed. Please come forward, sir. And again, if you would just recite your name and address, that would be great. Thank you.
My name is Peter Tenhoff. I live on Robbins Avenue.
Could you spell your name, sir?
Tenhaaf as in Frank.
Very good. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Tenhoff. 5 minutes.
Mr. Mayor, I have just a couple of questions actually that weren't addressed. I wonder if anybody knows if there are any established regulations limiting the hours of operations of a retail outlet.
All right, sir, we'll deal with that. Give us your 2 questions, and then
Okay.
we'll deal with this. We may deal with this later when the staff report comes forward, but go ahead and state your second question.
The other thing I wanted to say was actually a statement, and that is regarding the odor, which I have smelled myself, and yes, it does smell like a dead skunk. I think nobody can tackle this as a subjective issue. And I don't know if anywhere that anybody has measured what the chemical composition of this smell is to say whether it is, you know, some of the active ingredient in cannabis or some other, you know, chemical that the plants emit? But I think, you know, my only statement is that this council or nobody else can go after something and say, yes, it smells, or no, it doesn't. Somebody at some point has to measure what we're trying to measure and say we can or cannot eliminate that. End of
Right.
story. Just
Okay,
complaining about
that's
a
your
smell is
All right, that's
tough to
very
deal
good.
with.
Do you have another question?
No, that's it.
Okay,
That's
so
all I
we
want to
have
say.
those questions documented, and we'll, if they don't get dealt with through the course of the staff report, we'll make sure that we answer them deliberately. How's
Thank you.
that?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else, for the third time, is there anyone else who would be interested? Please come forward, Mr. Dykstra. Councilors, again, could I have your permission for this gentleman to speak? All those in favor? None opposed? You're clear, Mr. Dykstra. It's either speak or a leaky roof, right?
Hey, we stand beneath our roof, so for those that don't know, I am John Michael Dykstra. My address is 3999 15th Street. I look out my front window at the operation on 15th Street. I purchased the property in 2014 when Mr. Orsbrunt had a wonderful greenhouse operation of bedding plants, and enjoyed moving to the country from the city and enjoyed every aspect that it offered us. 2 years ago, that enjoyment changed. I remember coming home from a vacation and asking Mr. Orsbrunt what the smell was that was coming from his greenhouse, and with a smirk on his face, he said nothing. And I knew it the day it had started. I can sit in my driveway on the phone in my truck and get a headache from the smell. I can go to work, be in my office for 3 hours, get back to my truck, and still smell it. It comes and permeates our house, permeates our life. Some people have suggested that California has a zero odor bylaw. Your council knows that so does Canada. It is Section 61 of the Act. Unfortunately, the federal governments and governance might not be able to care about 15th Street as much as I do, let alone as much as maybe you should. So it is my encouragement to move forward with the act that we are speaking in favor of, that you put a freeze on development to research and to understand better the growing and the operations of these facilities. It seems to me that there is much of a race and a desire to just simply deal with the ramifications afterwards rather than be proactive. And in so, you have an opportunity to be in favor of this freeze, but then to move forward as a municipality that would perhaps be the leading municipality. Would that be nice for Lincoln to lead in this fact? Their operation is not illegal, and no one's going to suggest it is. But their actions are in contravention to the act. They are supposed to have zero odor today, and they do not. And so it is my encouragement to you as a council to figure out a way that you could enforce the bylaw. I have a suggestion. I would think you'd simply copy and paste the federal act, put it into a municipal bylaw, and therefore have the ability and the teeth to thus enforce a municipal bylaw. And you would not be changing anything about the license in which they themselves were garnered and are to operate under. There are much other things that we can speculate upon or can suggest that is not proper governance of their own behavior, but on this alone, there is a simplicity and a necessity for you to act. And that's simply my encouragement for you today.
Thank you very much. And your two matters on the matter of leading and the zero odor, if these items don't come up in the staff report, Mr. Dykstra, I'll make sure that we address them before we leave here today.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you very much. Now, before you leave, are there any questions, councillors? Being none. Correct? Okay, that's what I have in front of me. All right, councillors, if I haven't confused you, all in favor of the notice of motion being tabled, your pleasure on the motion. All those in favor? None opposed? The motion is carried. So that's how we will proceed. Any, all right. Now, we're going to now consider item 5.1 PD-01-19, which is cannabis retail in the town of Lincoln. And I would call on staff, and I believe it's Mr. Bruder, is that correct, Mr. Kirkopoulos? Call on Mr. Matt Bruder, and if you wouldn't mind, Matt, coming up and doing your presentation here, I would consider that and then once you've completed your presentation, Mr. Kirkopoulos, you're part of this show. Good. All right, then council will ask questions. Gentlemen, keep in mind some of the questions that have been asked. That would be very helpful if they could be dealt with. And go ahead.
Through you, Madam Mayor, and members of council and members of the community that are here today. This first portion of our presentation, and I want to be clear because we're going to be dealing with a number of issues today, will focus on the retail opting in, opting out portion of tonight's agenda. So Mr. Bruder and I are going to tag team a number of these presentations, but we will be beginning with cannabis retail operations, opting in, opting out. So just to provide you a brief overview, and we did hear from presenters earlier on a little bit about the framework and some background information, which I think was helpful. But again, just to take members of the community and members of council through some of the information that we have and highlight some of the key aspects of Bill 36. It does provide a framework for licensing of cannabis retail stores and the associated functions that go with them. And we've highlighted there what that includes, everything from managing staff to the way stock is purchased, to oversight, coordination, as well as compliance. It does empower the AGCO, the Alcohol Gaming Commission of Ontario, to manage and enforce the licensing process, which we heard a little bit about today, and police forces to enforce illegal storefronts. The challenges, and we have heard a few of these in the media of late, around the legislation is that it is constantly changing. As staff, we're continuing to get information almost on a daily basis in terms of what's happening and what some of the changes are provincially. The current legislation does not consider municipal official plans or zoning approvals as well as licensing bylaws at the current point in time. There still is a lack of clarity around where retail stores will be located. And other than the decision to opt in or out, the role of municipalities remains somewhat unclear, even including bylaw enforcement at this particular point in time. Again, information does continue to flow, and so some of this will be worked out over the coming days, weeks, and months is our hope. So some recent regulatory updates. Again, I shared with you that in November, the province did pass some legislation to protect children and youth and have set minimum distances of 150 meters or approximately 500 feet between retail stores and schools. In December, there was some subsequent information that was provided and that we shared around the provision of licenses and how they'll be phased. And we did hear about the 25 retail licenses that are being provided as of April 2019 through a lottery process that did begin today and is open for 48 hours. As we heard earlier, no licenses are going to be issued to municipalities with a population of less than 50,000. And it currently is unknown when the next phase of supply will allow us to move forward. So municipalities have an opportunity prior to January 22nd to do one of two things, opt in or opt out. If we opt out, we can opt back in at any particular point in time. However, if we opt in, we cannot opt out at a later date. Some of the funding implications, and we've heard a lot of information of late around what is the funding, what will municipalities be provided, should we choose to opt in as well as opt out, and they're highlighted here for you. The province has committed to $40 million in municipal funding to address some of those implementation costs, and there are strict criteria on what that can be used for. It's calculated on a per household basis, and Lincoln will receive, if we opt in, 2 payments in January and April in the amount of $11,759. The same formula as the January payment for municipalities that opted in. Municipalities that opt out will receive $5,000 only, again, because whether we opt in or out, there will be some implementation costs that go along with cannabis and the enforcement around cannabis. You've heard a lot of information around the federal excise tax, and if Ontario's portion of the tax on recreational marijuana over the first 2 years exceeds $100 million, and these are all a lot of unknowns at this point in time, but if it exceeds $100 million, the province will give half of the surplus to those municipalities that have opted in. If a municipality decides to opt out and then opts in at a later date, it will not be eligible for funding on this per household basis or any additional funding, including the federal excise duty surplus. I will say that as of this morning, all the CAOs from across the region did meet and highlighted and suggested that notwithstanding the fact that there's a moving line and a moving nature to the information, there will be a concerted effort to lobby as a collective region to continue to discuss this federal excise duty surplus portion so that if we opt in at a later date, assuming we choose to opt out or opt in, whatever that looks like, that we will continue to be part of that duty surplus. So we don't know what the province and the federal government will say to that in terms of how that apportioning happens. But I can tell you there's a lot of effort being made by the CAOs across the region to come together to look for additional funding around cannabis and cannabis retail. So next steps, you have a report in front of you that deals with opting in and opting out. Staff have recommended at this particular point in time for council consideration that you may want to consider opting out right now until a number of items can be addressed. However, we are in council's hands and at council's will. And so if council approves opting out, staff are going to continue to monitor the legislative updates pertaining to cannabis operations and report back to council as required. And since no retail licenses will be issued in Lincoln for the first phase, staff will seek to get more clarification into timing of future phases that really can determine for us whether or not we choose to opt in at a future point in time. So a fairly short presentation. There's a lot more in the report that we have in front of you. And both Mr. Bruder and I are here to answer any questions you may have specifically opting in and opting out.
Mr. Bruder, do you have anything specific to add?
Not at this time, Chair. I'll just wait and see, and if there's anything I can address, regarding any questions that come through, I'd be happy to do so.
All right. We have questions then. First question, Councillor Brunet.
Turn off?
Here's to 2019. So through you, Madam Mayor, to Mr. Kirkopoulos and Mr. Bruder. So I appreciate you making the comment about the excise tax, because for me, as we go into this vote, I don't think there's too many people that are going to talk about the fact that, hey, the bottom line, it's legal now in the province. There's opportunities for job employment and for driving economic revenue. But one of the real issues that I'm having is that we haven't had the time. I mean, let's be honest. Today's January the 7th, and we've got till the 22nd to make a decision. So, one of the things that I've been a firm believer since I came on council is, and we continue to wave this flag, is community engagement. And, we engage people when we talk about parks master plans and our transportation master plan, but to date, we haven't had any engagement on this topic of cannabis. So I'm hearing around the horn, and not that I'm concerned about what other municipalities are doing, but just cognizant of opportunities on how we can maybe engage the public between now and the 22nd. Have we crossed that line, or is there an opportunity? I'm hearing that there are some online surveys, which I'm hearing some of those are problematic, so I really don't want to go down the line on an online survey, but through you, Madam Mayor, to our senior team at the table there, is there an opportunity to do a telephone survey between now and the 22nd?
Just a moment, Mr. Kirkopoulos. Councillor, are you talking about, is your question related to retail cannabis or cannabis in a more general sense?
Well, in light of the fact that at some point before we go home tonight, we're going to be voting on opting in or opting out. My question is,
We're actually going to be doing it after the questions. That's why I want to
Yes.
make sure that
Yes.
you're speaking to the issue at hand.
absolutely, Madam Mayor.
Okay, thank you.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I'm going to let Ms. Beatty address the portion of the councillor's question specific to a telephone poll.
Through you, Madam Mayor, to Councillor Brunet's question, it is possible to do a telephone survey. That would be in the time frame that we have allotted. That would be the best approach. As you mentioned, there are significant challenges to the online surveys in terms of validation. So the telephone survey is possible. It does come at a cost. It's between $5,000 and $7,000. So I'd request that come out of if council were to choose to opt in, that come out of the implementation funds that we'll be receiving from the province.
Thank you, Mary. Stand through you to the CAO and to our planner, Matt. Someone's knocking on the door. My question is around the zoning considerations. With opting in, the municipal official plans, zoning approvals and licensing bylaws will not apply. Well, my question is, if we opt in, can we still look at our official plan and our zoning bylaws? Can we make changes at that point?
Through you, Ms. Chair. Really, we could, but at the end of the day, the license would allow them to locate wherever. I think that would supersede, or at least that's the way the wording is that I've encountered so far. with respect to the potential retail operations and retail licenses is that, whatever changes we might make still wouldn't apply, provided that they have proper retail operating licenses.
So if I could, through you, Madam Mayor, if I could make an additional comment, Councillor. My colleague in Niagara Falls and a number of other municipalities are looking to request to the province of Ontario that we be given some more regulatory authorities to look at things in terms of restricting location based on proximity to some of the things that have been identified already. So we heard about schools, community centers, youth facilities, and other cannabis retail stores. Again, we don't know what the province will say, and Mr. Bruder is correct that at this particular point in time, there is no ability to impose those restrictions, but there is I think there is going to be a request, and a number of municipalities are looking to come together to seek a little bit more regulatory control.
I guess what I was hoping for is if you can opt in with some attached conditions, which is maybe a little too hopeful, but anyway.
Through you, Madam Mayor, at this particular point in time, I think that is, you're correct, Councillor. I wish we could be in front of you here recommending that you can opt in and put all of these other regulatory controls in place. That may come in the future, but at this particular point in time, that's not the case.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Mary.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Through you, I'm concerned that we're looking at a major missed opportunity here that, and I know, the other communities are looking at it that way as well, that, down the road, I know the numbers are small now, but down the road, excise tax may be a significant number to those that are opting in today. So, I absolutely support Councillor Brunet's request for some kind of public opinion, public input between now and the 22nd, and I would suggest that we not vote on the opt-out today, and that we look at what can we do between now and then, since we haven't met until today. What can we do between now and the 22nd to gauge the temperature of the community and find out where we're at?
Councillor, I just want to remind you that if you are intending to defer this motion, you've probably said too much. So you may have already made some other arrangements. I don't know, but I'm just reminding you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. It's legal. We know that. It's legal. It's available to our residents today online. It's not like we're stopping cannabis coming into our town. The economic benefit that the delegation mentioned, I agree with. I agree that it's going to bring economic benefit into our downtowns or wherever we have a store. And I think that the 25 licenses that we know are being issued are not coming our way. And I think that would buy us some time as well to look at how do we best prepare to handle retail in town. So I think we really need to take a look at what the town would think of this. I personally think you're going to get many for and many against. So again, it's going to come back to the council as to how do we proceed from here. So I would absolutely support some kind of survey over the next 2 weeks to get some information and get some feedback from the residents of the town. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Councillor Mikkelsen.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Through you to Mr. Kirkopoulos and Mr. Bruder. The funds of $11,759, does the province influence us as to how we allocate that money or spend it? Or are we able to spend that as we see fit?
Through you, Madam Mayor, to Councillor Mikulik. Well, I haven't seen them yet. They're specific to implementation costs, so some of that would be outreach and communication, and some of that would be around the enforcement piece of it.
And moving forward, in the future, those excise tax funds we could be possibly missing out on those monies that, should we say no at this time.
Through you, Madam Mayor, that is correct, Councillor.
All right, thank you, that's all.
Counselor? I have two speakers here, but I'm not able to control the,
I thought she did. I thought she turned it off when she
oh, you need to turn your.
Oh,
And the next speaker is Counselor Patrick.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. Question to Mr. Kirkopoulos and Mr. Britter. And I like where Councilor McPherson's going. I mean, maybe there's other alternatives to a telephone pole. Maybe there's drop-in set up over the next 2 weeks at, areas where we know that generate a lot of traffic, the Jordan Arena, the Beamsville Arena, things like that to gauge, because it's funny, the commentary that I've received, and I don't mean to, or I don't want to prejudge, but I'm surprised at the response that I'm getting from people to say opt-in. The fact that it will limit the black market and the nefarious things that are done with that black market product, that and other products. But I think the part that I'm hung up on is, and I would like too to get some more information on this, is this split on the excise tax. So, like, do we know yet what that split is? So if it goes over the $100 million, it's split based on the municipalities that opt in. So 10 municipalities opt in. How is that share dispersed amongst those 10? Is it per capita? Like, do we have any idea what that is? Because, I mean, right now, with our population, and we get the 11.7 on 40 million, so, I mean, 2.5 times that. Is it 50,000 we're looking at? Like, this to me could be that not lottery funds, but casino funds, casino dollars that might be available. And we're going to enter into budget on Wednesday night. We're talking about the infrastructure gap, and maybe this is a way that you're able to close that. But, and again, to Councillor Timmer's question, if we decide to opt in on the 22nd, knowing that we're not eligible in the first round, does that not give us time to come up with those changes in our bylaw, or does it become from that date on the 22nd? Because I think there might be, a 12 to 18 month window before we even have to explore that getting set up in our town, which would give us more than enough time to iron out the kinks. So just.
Gentlemen, anything to add?
Through you, Madam Mayor, absolutely. So I'll try to address each of those points that Councillor Patrick-Riva made, starting with how it's going to be distributed. Our understanding right now is that it will be on a per household basis, similar to the way they're apportioning the current one. One point of clarification, it is anything on the federal excise tax that exceeds $100 million. So it could be $500 million. We don't know how successful, per se, this may be, and we don't know what that number looks like. So, I mean, if you're doing your math, it could be considerably more. The one comment I'll make that I did make earlier on is that a number of the municipalities have discussed continuing to lobby senior levels of government to remain part of the federal excise duty surplus should we choose to opt in the future. Notwithstanding the way it's currently written in the provincial legislation, that isn't the case. As of this morning, I know that was one of the directions that there was unanimity on behalf of all of the CAOs, that we would do that. So I think I've answered all of your questions, Councillor. If there was one I missed, please.
Counselor?
I got a lot of points.
Yeah.
The question about open houses rather than the phone survey.
Yep, through you, Madam Mayor, you know, I think this is a serious issue. I think the only caution, similar to surveys and that Ms. Beatty highlighted, is that we want a very unbiased reflection of what the community thinks, and I think sometimes when you select certain locations that definitely target more to a certain demographic, you often find that particular case. That is not to say we couldn't do that as well. There is a time constraint and an ability just to set up meetings like this and promote them appropriately. So what a lot of municipalities are doing are really turning to a telephone poll that is very random, that does target folks of all backgrounds, ages, locations within the community as well. Typically those that are using social media or other online platforms are of a certain demographic, and as a result of that, we may be unbiased or we may be biased or unfairly targeting one more than the other. So I think as Ms. Beatty highlighted, I'd recommend going with her recommendation and doing a telephone poll.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Through you to the CEO and Mr. Bruder. I'm going to echo Councillor Patriva's sentiments about some of the informal feedback I've gotten from my constituents. Not only was I surprised by it, I was astounded by not only the number of opt-in responses from some of the means I tried to receive the information, but the demographics from them, like everyone from 19, 20-year-olds up to 75, almost 80-year-olds. People, family people, police officers, firemen, that I never would have assumed would have been an opt-inner, but an advocate for opting in. Not necessarily an advocate for use, but an advocate for opting in. And in doing some research on my own and trying to set aside my own stigma that I had, and I think that's a very important thing. Like, this is now the new social standard as set by legal, the new legal precedent. So going through the information provided by council, like, I have a hard time understanding, now that this is the new legal standard, why do we treat this any differently than alcohol? Retail sales in Lincoln, in the municipality, be it in an outlet in the urban area or in the rural area, like a winery, a brewery, why is this any different now than what or how we handle those other retail outlets, and should it be? Like, it's one of those things that I can't, going through all the paperwork, all the background information, I can't find a reason why we should treat it any differently, even now or in the future. And if we do opt in, we do still have, again, that 12 or 18 months to potentially change some bylaw or land use options to make ourselves ready for that day one of when bricks and mortar can open up. But like, I don't look at it from a financial standpoint. I just look at it as, right now it's legal to grow your own in Lincoln. It's legal to buy through the OCS. It's legal to consume wherever you can publicly smoke or consume. It's one of those things now that who wins by us opting out? And like, I see a big black market or gray market advocacy that they would be content by us opting out, but it's one of those things that this is something that, just even based on the first few weeks of online sales, it's obviously something that is a need in the community, and I think that I just can't understand why we treat it any differently than maybe alcohol sales.
So Councillor Russell, do you have a question in there?
That's my question. Why do we treat this any differently than alcohol sales
Very
and
good.
retail sales?
Thank you. Gentlemen?
Through you, Your Worship, I don't think necessarily, you know, the decision to opt out, or the recommendation rather to opt out by staff at the moment, is necessarily to result in treating them differently per se. I think, you know, what the rationale was behind that is currently there's a lot of unknowns still with respect, like, things are constantly evolving, they continue to evolve. As a matter of fact, they've evolved significantly since that report was authored in the first place, you know, now that we have this lottery system and whatnot. So, I mean, I think, you know, it's just a matter of us still not knowing what our role is, at least in a concrete frame of what the municipality's going to be able to do, what's within our means to do. And, you know, moving forward, you know, the decision was, you know, this, if the recommendation to opt out is supported, well, then there still is the flexibility. You know, it's not like we're saying we're opting out for in perpetuity. What we're saying is, you know, we're going to continue to evaluate these changes that keep coming down the pipe, and, you know, that's intended to lead to a more informed decision later.
Through you, Madam Mayor, if I could add a few comments. I think, Councillor, you make a great point in that in some fashion, a lot of people are saying it shouldn't be treated differently. It is law, both provincially, it's law across the country. I think one thing you've heard me say a number of times is sometimes we need to pause and ready the community for change, but I get with that there is the potential risk around the excise tax and some other issues that that council needs to be cognizant and aware of. And I think one of the other reasons we chose to opt out, again, knowing we could opt back in, is really around doing proper engagement with the community. I think not having a rush timeline over the holidays, not looking at the changing landscape, but trying to decipher as we move forward when the landscape settles a bit. Real true engagement in a way where we talk to people, where we go out to the various locations, where we do a broad-based campaign. And again, one of the conversations this morning when we met on this particular topic was around the public health implications and how a proper engagement on the public health side would take at least 6 months to do properly. And so, again, not saying that there are public health issues. I'm not going to make that assertion, and our Associate Medical Officer of Health didn't make that assertion this morning either. There's just a lot of unknowns, and I think from the perspective of that, that's where our recommendation was coming from. But definitely, as I've said to a few members of council, should council choose to opt out, we will be ready. We will do what we can. Or sorry, should council choose to opt in, we will be ready for the April 2019 time horizon, not knowing whether it's 12, 18 months, 6 months, 3 months, when supply replenishes itself and that comes out. I think our hope would be that it would be that longer duration and allow us to ready ourselves. But again, we don't know. I think it goes to the point of those unknowns. But we will be ready regardless of the decision to opt in or opt out.
Councillor? All right. Thank you, gentlemen. Councillor Njima.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So I want to say that I appreciate the report. It's very detailed and very well laid out, and a lot of really good information in here. So I've heard suggestions that we do a little more public consultation. I don't have any concerns with that. I think if January 22nd is our deadline, I think that's probably a good idea. Why not take advantage of that and do more public consultation? But what I'm reading in the report here, which is my primary concern, and I'm hearing it echoed, is, quote, "It is unclear if a cannabis retail store would need to be located within a municipal commercial zone where retail is a permitted use." And also a little later on, the report says, "In addition, there are suggestions and information materials that indicate municipalities will not be able to regulate retail operations through land use zoning provisions." And as a municipality, one of our responsibilities is to, through our zoning regulations, try to avoid land use conflicts. So that does concern me. So I guess I'd ask that that you confirm what I've just said, what I'm reading in the report, that we really don't know. There is no clarity at this time, and it really does they seem to be leaning toward the idea that our zoning bylaws will not have any effect as to where these stores will go, the retail uses.
Gentlemen?
Through you, Your Worship, yeah, that is what the current wording in the informative materials that we've gone through, that's what the wording implies at this time. I've seen that in multiple places. I've seen it in briefing notes. I've seen it on the federal website, so Health Canada website as well.
Okay, thank you very much. And to be honest, I'm not terribly concerned about the sale of the product itself, and I understand that it's the business model is positive. I'm looking forward to the educational components that this gentleman was speaking about earlier on. But I do have concern about us as a municipality not being able to regulate the location of the stores and the other unknowns that I've heard tonight. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Mr. Kakopoulos.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I think the one addition that I would make is the provincial regulation around restriction to 150 meters within a school. So you're right, we don't have a lot. We have a little in terms of where we can put them. But again, it is fairly minimal. So you're correct, Councillor. in terms of what you're suggesting as well. There are some other provincial regulations in terms of what the stores and where they can be part or not part of. And you heard some of that earlier. They need to be standalone. There needs to be an allowance for no one under the age of 19 to access the premises, as well as operating hours between 9 a.m. and 11 p.m.
All right, are you satisfied, Councillor?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I still, the fact that it won't be our zoning bylaw that has the power to control locations still concerns me, but I do appreciate that. Thank you.
All right. I have no one else on the speakers list, and, but I do have a motion. I'm just taking into consideration some of the comments that I heard through the discussion. I have Councillor Timmers.
I just thought you were looking for a mover for that motion.
No, I'm looking to accommodate further dialogue. Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So I would move that we defer this report and this vote and take up the public.
I'm sorry, my apologies. I'm sorry, Councillor. Madam Clerk, checking with you, Councillor McPherson cannot defer. Is that correct? He has already spoken? Or the motion is not on the table, so therefore he has not spoken to the motion? What is the correct process?
The motion has to be put on the table.
Right.
And then discussion on, do we want to defer that? So as the chair, you need to call that.
I'm talking about the motion that's related to Bill 36.
So the report.
Is it correct that Councillor McPherson can defer this motion?
Yes, it is.
Fine, thank you very much. Go ahead, Councillor. So you're moving to
So
defer.
I would move that we defer to look into public input to the issue, and that we collect that information and reconvene prior to January 22nd to make a decision.
Yes. Okay, is everybody clear on the motion? Councillor McPherson's moving to defer, and he's also providing, the motion is providing direction to staff to carry out further consultation with the public.
Correct.
The third part of it is to come back together, would be a special meeting, or it would be part of another meeting that we already have scheduled, so that this motion could be considered.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. I'm going to call a majority vote. All of those in favor? Are there any opposed? Thank you very much. The motion is carried. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm trying to be as careful as I can with the different parts of this. I want you to leave this evening being absolutely clear about the actions that we have taken. All right, now, gentlemen, it's 5:35, and we have two more pieces that need to be addressed. So we're moving on now to the interim control bylaw, which is item 5.2 PD-02-19. Who's doing the presentation? Thank you, Mr. Bruder.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, as a separate issue, I wanted to speak a little bit to the cannabis cultivation piece. As we've been hearing throughout the evening so far, we're looking at recommending an interim control bylaw that pertains to cannabis cultivation, so I want to talk a little bit about it. Specifically, what it is, first of all. So an interim control bylaw, it's a Planning Act tool, basically, that allows planners, while they're undertaking a larger study, to temporarily freeze certain types of land uses, applications for land uses while that study is going on, just to provide time for staff to be able to properly examine the implications of whatever changes they're considering, whatever might need to be revised. With particular reference to cannabis cultivation, we've had a influx of inquiries about potential cultivation operations within the town. And I think it's been stated earlier today, but I'll state it again, is in the eyes of the province, of the Ontario Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs, there's no distinction between cannabis crop and any other crop in terms of potential impacts that result from operations. So that led to obviously some input provided by residents, again, as you heard earlier, pertaining to, you know, what the impacts are, what's being experienced, what are concerns moving forward. So that prompted us to obviously take a look at, you know, what can be done at the town level to address some of these issues. Coincidentally, the staff were looking at reviewing and updating, doing a comprehensive update of the town zoning bylaw. It's a little bit antiquated in some aspects, and it just happens to be a perfect time to go through that study as it is. So as a component of that, that's what we'd be looking at doing. Sorry, I'm not keeping up with the slide here. But, you know, we would want to do that, and that affords us the opportunity to look at some of these cultivation operations that are being proposed and what, you know, what could be done to, you know, better regulate those types of land uses. One of the challenges so far too, you know, there's been a evolving regulatory landscape at both provincial and federal levels. Really hard to keep track of the licensing regime. It's been changing. It's changed a few times. You know, now there's yet newer licensing regime that was just released not all that long ago, at the end of 2018. So all these things together have led us to recommending to put a hold on this type of development until we really get a better understanding through our zoning review of how to better implement some type of control, as we have a large rural residential contingent. So how would an interim control bylaw, if approved, affect current operations? So I want to make it clear that operations that are in existence prior to the passing of the interim control bylaw will not be affected by it. It will apply to all new proposed developments, all new greenhouses. It'll apply to any operators switching crops prior to the passing of the interim control bylaw if it's approved. But it won't, if an operation that is in existence today continues to operate in the exact same capacity without an expansion, then it would not apply to that. However, I did want to note, I did reference the regulatory framework and how it's changed and how the licensing regime has changed. If the license that a holder has since been updated, well, you know, in terms of, we heard a little bit about designated growers under the former access to cannabis for medical purposes licensing regime. They're eventually going to need to update their license to the most recent legislation. And that legislation, from what I understand, includes more stringent controls on odor and security. But the timing of the renewal requirements has not yet been made clear. So how will the zoning update, that's really the end result here, the interim control bylaw is intended to put a hold, to provide us time to go through the study to update the zoning. So at the end of that zoning bylaw update, what will it mean to current operations? Again, the zoning bylaw, any zoning can't be implemented retroactively, meaning, again, existing operations before the passing of that and effectively before the interim control bylaw, since it puts a hold on it, would not be subject to the new requirements. But again, you know, any new development associated with cannabis and conversion from non-cannabis facilities to cannabis, those would be impacted by the zoning update. So just some timelines. With an interim control bylaw, you can implement one for a year with the possibility of extending for another year. Again, that year period is approximately what the study for the zoning review and update would take. So there is some flexibility to adjust that time based on how long the study actually takes, but it's anticipated to take around there. So in early 2019, we're looking to retain a third-party consultant to look at our zoning. We've already issued an RFP. We're looking to evaluate, to look at a consultant to really take the charge on that comprehensive review and update, of course, with staff overseeing and being integral to the process. And there's also going to be an extensive public consultation piece to the zoning update. There'll be opportunities for input throughout, both from stakeholders, agencies, and residents as well. At council's discretion, based on how this study goes, based on how long it takes, should information change or the study is completed earlier than anticipated, council may lift the interim control bylaw. So that's the end of the slideshow. But in terms of next steps, as I mentioned, there's going to be the zoning update that's going to be implemented in the meanwhile. Should the interim control bylaw be approved, there'll be some enforcement measures that we'll need to undertake just to uphold that with respect to crop switching. If there was a crop that's switched from non-cannabis to cannabis, then that would be something we'd be looking at enforcing because it is one of our bylaws. So.
All right, I would just invite you to provide a little bit more clarification. At the current time, if a farmer, if a greenhouse operator is growing plants, flowers, and the greenhouse operator decides to change their crop to peppers, do they come to the town for special license or a special consideration or a special approval?
Currently, no, they do not.
Okay. If they decide that they want to grow cannabis, they do have to get approval or they do not have to get approval?
It's our intention that they will need to get approval while the interim control bylaw is in place, while we figure out zoning.
And if there was no interim control bylaw?
They wouldn't have to.
They wouldn't have to, okay. All right. Anything more that you'd like to add?
No, not at this time.
Okay, we'll go to the speakers list. Councillor McPherson.
Oh, thank you, Madam Mayor. Through you. So you did clear up one thing in that presentation. Thank you very much on existing greenhouses switching it to cannabis. Because by the report, it was very focused on new builds. And so I want to go down the licensing road here a little bit. And my fear is that we are potentially going to block, let me first say, we don't want another 15th Street. We don't want that, right? But my fear is we're going to block another Up Cannabis, if you will. And I think Up Cannabis is doing things right. Their odor control, their security, everything is 5-star, is top-notch. So you talked a little bit about new licensing. So and maybe this may be a question that you don't have the answer to, but if a new build was to come along, is it Up Cannabis, 5-star, or is it 15th Street potentially?
Through you, Your Worship, for any new ones that are being proposed,
Right.
so there's still, the new licensing regime, there's still different classifications of licenses. There's one for micro cultivation. I believe that's less, the threshold for that size is 200 square meters of canopy size. That's kind of the main factor. And for that particular license, the controls required by Health Canada are less stringent than the next one, which is for standard cultivation. Those are the larger ones like you're seeing with Up Cannabis. That's a different class. I'm not exactly privy to what the requirements are in terms of security or some of the other things that Health Canada is asking for, but I know the controls are more stringent. And then there's actually a third category now. Doesn't really affect what we're talking about, but there's also a nursery license that's for operators who want to look at different strands, developing different strands, selling those strands to other operators and things like that. So it has evolved a little bit further.
Okay, I'm going to come back to that if you wouldn't mind, Madam Mayor, but my second question is, can you talk to the recertification of 15th Street, Jordan Road, Martin Road, Tufford Road? Can you talk to that recertification process?
Yeah, through you, Your Worship. So I'm not exactly sure about the time period in which, from when they have their that's a designated grower, by the way, that particular license under the former access to cannabis for medical purposes regime that has since been replaced by what I just described. But I'm not exactly sure the time frame of when they're required to renew, but when they do renew, it's my understanding that they will need to renew under the micro cultivation license that I was referring to. So in that case, I still, I'm of the opinion, like what I've heard is that the requirements are still more stringent than the former designated grower's license, but they're not quite as to the same capacity as something like your Up Cannabis would be held to.
Okay.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I mean, I think, the simple way to answer that, Councillor, is that in time, all cannabis operations will need to adhere to a much more stringent set of criteria, both from an odor perspective, a production perspective, a security perspective. What we don't know, again, because there is a moving target here, is when that will occur. But typically, if a new one was to come to town right now, like an Up Cannabis, they would be caught through this interim control bylaw. I think that's why our caution, but our support for this is such that we will begin and undertake the zoning bylaw immediately to make sure that we get zoning conformity in place, that we address some of the issues. We are going to continue to work with Health Canada to address odor and to make sure that it is being enforced. So we heard a lot about odor. Under the new license, there are some strict criteria. Under the old one, there are not. But I think, we heard tonight, it is correct that there shouldn't be any odor coming from here. I think in talking to federal representatives as early as this afternoon, it's about getting Health Canada to enforce those odor issues. That said, to your specific question, it will get caught. Even an Up Cannabis type operation will get caught in this interim control bylaw at this particular point in time.
And through you, Madam Mayor, so, my concern is, when you look at an Up Cannabis type of facility and the investment that they're making, both from the build that they're doing, local contractors, going to hire 100, 150 more people. I mean, and if they're playing by the rules, our interim bylaw now will block any of that investment coming in, potentially. So I'm wondering if, and I know we got to address the issues that we've got. I mean, we heard loud and clear on the campaign trail about all of those operations that stink. Quite, that's the way it is. But I wonder if we're not just throwing a blanket over the whole thing here, and potentially missing, an opportunity for somebody that's going to be that type of facility. And if we can't rethink how we're doing this or how we're writing this interim bylaw to accommodate that potential investment. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you very much. Do you have any response, gentlemen?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I mean, I wish I had one that would allow it to be as crystal clear, I think, as we want to, and Matt can maybe speak if there's anything. But the Planning Act is fairly prescriptive on what interim control bylaws can and can't do. Again, I think our undertaking will be to do this as quickly as possible to address that zoning conformity that we spoke about. It's still going to take some time to do that, I think, as Mr. Bruder highlighted. And I think all we can do is suggest to those good community industry partners like an Up Cannabis, should another one want to come into town, that the duration, I mean, their process will take some time as well in terms of securing land, design, going through the planning process, et cetera. So I think all I can assure council of is that this isn't a forever and a day type interim control bylaw. We're very clearly stipulated in terms of how long it can be in place and how long it can't be in place and the types of things we can put it in place for.
Okay, thank you. Moving on, Councillor Pachuriva.
Thanks, Your Worship. Step in the right direction, but you know, question out of this. So, the interim control bylaw, we can control the use of where the buildings are, what type of buildings are permitted, building heights, setbacks, the such. So, are we able to develop? And again, along Councillor McPherson's question. So, I mean, you can see the operations that don't have any issues. They're your glass greenhouses. They're the ones with proper carbon filters. They're the ones that abide by the rules. So can we be emphatic and specific to say, this is what's required to do business in the town of Lincoln? Because one of the things that's allowed under this is open field growing. You don't have to be in a greenhouse. So
Your question?
Yeah, so can we be specific to say, this is what's required in the town of Lincoln? So that's my number one question.
Matt, Mr. Bruder?
Yeah, through you, Your Worship. Yeah, most certainly. I mean, I think that's
Okay.
going to be one of the goals when we're undertaking our comprehensive review and update of our zoning bylaws. We want to be very clear on those particular things that are required to do business in the town, as you say.
Okay.
But you know, in terms of the interim control bylaw, it doesn't really. Those kinds of things don't factor into it. It's more just to put a temporary hold on things until you can develop those measures. You know, so that's
Understood. And through you, Madam Mayor, so knowing that these non-conformers, their license will come due from Health Canada. So will we get notice of that? And then, but again, we need to do something now, like Mr. Dykstra said, you know, there's the teeth that are actually there that we can enforce this now, right? The 0% odors. So, I mean, so what we've got a long-term gain,
Yeah.
got a short-term gain. So, can this be both addressed in the interim control?
Well, through you, Your Worship, I think really in terms of, you know, when those licenses are updated and whatnot, that is something that we'll continue to try to work with Health Canada to make sure that the lines of communication remain open for that particular item at least.
So does that mean right now that the answer to that question would be no, that we will not be renewed, or we will not be informed, or we're not sure?
At this particular time, I'm unsure. I mean, that's something we're going to be striving for. That's something we're going to be, you know, providing input that we want to be informed, so.
Right. Okay, and I just want to be clear on the question that was asked by one of our speakers earlier. The responsibility, the accountability for the compliance around odors lies strictly with Health Canada. Is that correct? Is that what we should understand?
Through you, Madam Mayor, so yes and no. I don't think it's been tested yet. So we've had this conversation with OMAFRA, and OMAFRA likes to work from a place of, let's have two willing parties sit down and talk about how we address odor issues. I think legally I'd like to test that, and that's a conversation we will have with council probably more on an in-camera basis, because I believe we probably should do more. Now, we may get challenged, and I have read just recently some of the challenges that communities around us like Norfolk County and others are facing as a result of that. But I would prefer a court of law tell us that we can't do that sort of enforcement versus simply looking at the interpretation. And so staff have met with OMAFRA on a number of occasions. We've heard some of our residents talk about some of their frustrations. I can echo similarly some of our frustrations. Right now, odor is a matter of Health Canada, but we will look at, when we come back to you, what we can do from our perspective, from the town's perspective, and how that can be held up in a court of law should we get challenged with that, because that may be the path that we're going down, and that would be the path that I probably will recommend to you.
And in terms of subjectivity and the question asked by one of our other speakers, the issue of who would be determining the tolerable particulates when we're talking about odor, And is that a question that we would ask, or is that a study that would normally be done by Health Canada?
Through you, Madam Mayor, that typically is something done through OMAFRA. But again, actually doing the testing and measuring is the easy part. It's the enforcement, and that's where OMAFRA is challenged.
Okay, thank you. Satisfactory, Councillor?
Satisfactory. Having been an active councillor during the Flyville days, I'd like to get a resolution to this sooner than later.
Thank you very much. I have two speakers, but the clerk reminds me that we're 5 minutes to the end of our time, and I just have to request your pleasure on a motion to adjourn and reconvene to a time after our next meeting. So I put that on the table, and I ask for your pleasure on the motion. Those in favor to adjourn and reconvene? I would say that you're all opposed to it. Very good. All right, Madam Clerk, we continue on. Very good, thank you. We're just following our procedures and keeping things tidy. Okay, however, let's be tight, Councillor. So I'm moving on to the next speaker. I guess I didn't hold it long enough. And
Thank
that
you,
would be
Mary
Councillor
Stin.
Timmers.
Thank you, Mary Stin. I absolutely support this 100%. I'm very happy to see that we're doing this tonight. I know we're going to be looking at setbacks, odor, lighting. And we can do it for up to a year, or we can extend it to 2 years. And I really hope that we don't rush this too quickly, because we need to get this right. And my question I have, I think it could have been answered, but I'm going to ask it anyway. It's around the renewing the licenses. If someone comes to renew their license and they have infractions, say the town bylaws, they've broken many of our new bylaws, is there some way we can affect the renewal of their license? Just putting it on the table.
Certainly a good question, through you, Your Worship. So we were just conferring a little bit about the renewal and what exactly the town role will be. So for instance, when it's a new application, we're a commenting agency for sure, so there would be an opportunity. But I haven't come across the same clarity with respect to renewals when just simply a renewal from one type of older, outdated license to the most recent. I'm not exactly sure how our input is going to play in at this time, but that's something I'll try to get a better handle on. I'll try to get an answer for you.
I guess what I'm looking for is the facilities that are not playing by the rules, and, you know, like 15th Street, and like how do we bring them into line? So maybe there's something there with the licensing, so anyway. Thank
Through you, Madam Mayor, I'd be remiss if I didn't highlight, without getting into details, that there is currently, multi-agency coordination happening as it relates to enforcement. I don't want to share too much information on that, but it is happening. It continues to happen, and it will happen. So while that doesn't catch everything, and things like blitzes happen when they happen, that multi-agency coordination will continue.
Thank you.
All right, and we have one more speaker. And that would be Councillor Brunet.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My question really has been asked around the horseshoe now, but I just, you made the comment, Madam Mayor, earlier that you wanted to make sure that everyone left this chamber tonight with clarity. And certainly, one of the things that stands out to me, I'm really glad to see that, item 5.2 is coming up, interim control bylaw. Matt Bruder has indicated we've had an archaic bylaw here, and it's about time we're dealing with it. But we've had people come to the mic. Ms. Diaz, Mr. Conway, Mr. Tenhoff, Mr. Dykstra speak very articulately about the frustrations they're feeling. And, what is just almost unbelievable to me is that, OMAFRA, as Mr. Kirkopoulos has indicated, is the people that are supposed to have the teeth in the game here, and yet they come out here, with no reason to look at this in any type of, compassionate manner to the people that are having the problems, and to come up with some solutions. So I'm glad through you, Madam Mayor, that Mr. Kirkopoulos is saying that we have had, our staff has had discussion, if I'm reading you correctly, that we've had discussions with OMAFRA. And, you know, as Mr. Dykstra, you know, indicated, from a federal perspective, there might be some things there that we can be looking at from Section 61. So, you know, it's great. I'm really glad to see that we're updating this interim control bylaw and that it coincides with us opting in and opting out. But, you know, there's some real issues in our municipality that have been grandfathered in, and we need to deal with those. And I hope that we can deal with those on a timely fashion, because, you know, we've been hearing about this long before the election, and now it's coming upon us. And we've heard very clearly we've got issues in the municipality. So, you know, if Health Canada and OMAFRA is the people that we need to get to the table, and our CAO is telling us that he'd like to have the opportunity to be the first person to challenge this, game on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Mikulik.
Through you, Madam Mayor. I like this bylaw. I want to just reaffirm and hoping for clarity that this will not have any impact on existing farmers that follow the good production practices. You know, they don't need to be inspected monthly. You know, these sort of people, I want to make sure and ensure that there will be no negative side effect with regards to this bylaw.
Mr. Bruder?
Yep, through you, Your Worship, that's correct. It's not going to have any impact on them.
Satisfactory, Councillor? All right, Councillors, I have a motion moved by Councillor Brunet and seconded by Councillor Pachariva that Council approve an interim control bylaw pursuant to Section 38 of the Planning Act for a period of 1 year, with possibility of extension, temporarily prohibiting all development pertaining to cannabis cultivation and production operations during the review of the town's comprehensive zoning bylaw number 93-14-Z1. Are there any questions to the motion? Your pleasure to the motion. Those who approve, none opposed, the motion is carried. Thank you very much, councillors. Thank you for your questions, and thank you very much for the presentation. Gentlemen, no clapping, please. Thank you very much. Now we move on. There's an additional motion here, which is just as important. I wouldn't recommend that you leave. So now we're going to consider additional item 5.3. We've dealt with the issue of the retail. It has been deferred, pending more information. We have just passed the interim control bylaw for development associated with cannabis cultivation and production. And we're now going to consider an additional item 5.3. And Councillor McPherson will read the motion. Madam Clerk, will it come up on the screen? Okay. Councillor McPherson? Okay.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So I motion and second, Councillor Timmers has seconded the motion. This is a notice of motion. Whereas complaints and issues of odors and security on or around existing cannabis grow facilities is increasing, and whereas the federal government is the approval body for cannabis operations, and whereas approval by the provincial government currently deems cannabis an agricultural product for the purposes of growing, and whereas greenhouses are increasingly changing use and being purchased for the sole purpose of cannabis growing, and whereas municipalities are limited to property bylaw enforcement in terms of the current jurisdictional enforcement and oversight, and whereas the jurisdiction of enforcement is therefore multi-agency. Therefore, be it resolved that Council directs staff to continue to engage with all required agencies on enforcement and mitigation strategies, including but not limited to various provincial ministries, the Niagara Regional Police, and Niagara Region, and to report back to Council as required on strategies and required municipal actions, and that staff update Council on a quarterly basis beginning Q1 of 2019 or as needed for the duration of this year. Can I speak to the motion, please?
Absolutely.
Thank you. So, as we heard, the interim bylaw really speaks to new builds and, as we learned tonight, current greenhouse operations wanting to move to cannabis. It really does not speak to the existing facilities. So this motion directs staff to work with various agencies and other levels of government to find solutions to the issues as articulated by the presenters so well tonight, and that we've got a direction coming from the council to start that process. And as you heard, for us to get regular updates as to what successes have we got. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Are there any questions? Councillor Pachariva.
Yes, through you, Madam Mayor, to the presenter. Councilor McPherson, given what we heard tonight from Mr. Dykstra with respect to Section 61 of the Federal Act and the 0% odor, any thoughts of putting that in there somewhere, like after, and whereas the federal government is the approved body for cannabis operations, whereas Section 61 of said federal act deals specifically and states that there will be a 0% odor, and then including them also below in the agencies you're going to deal with. I think by recognizing that fact, that we know it's there, and putting it in this motion, or notice of motion, I think gives it some more teeth. And then again, it's a proactive approach, and maybe other councils can take this and use it going forward.
All right, thank you very much, Councillor. Just a moment now. Keep your microphone on. Madam Clerk, is there anything ill-advised about including only one piece of legislation in this motion? Nothing? All right, thank you very much. And do you consider that a friendly amendment, Councillor?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Do you have the wording for your colleague? Who has the
Thank you,
wording?
Madam Mayor. Yes, I will take that as a friendly amendment. I think that's a great suggestion, and I wonder if it might not be better in the there it be resolved to find a spot in there, working with agencies, and so, thank you.
Okay, do you have wording, Councillor?
I can work on some.
Do you have the wording from Mr. Kravakos?
Through you, Madam Mayor, if I could just suggest that we add in the therefore be it resolved, I'd like to verify legislation first before we actually throw legislation in the whereases. And the whereas is less important than the direction actually that we're receiving. So leave it with staff. I think you can pass it. We understand where we're going to throw after provincial ministries, federal agencies, and then we can approve it as it stands.
And my only point, Councillor, is that there may be a plethora of other pieces that need to be included in there that are going to be important as well. Councillor McPherson, are you satisfied with
I am.
this informal
Thank you.
discussion? All right. Are there any other questions? There being none, your pleasure on the motion, those in favor? Any opposed? The motion is carried. Thank you very much. All right, well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Those are the three major components. We've covered new, we've covered existing, and we've covered the retail element partially. All right, now we'll move on to a motion to receive and file information items, and there are none this evening. A motion. Oh, my apologies. Yes, here I've written so many notes that I'm not seeing. All right, yes, we have, we will now consider item 5.4, which is FN-02-19, regarding the dedicated gas tax funds from the province of Ontario for the U-Link transit system. Mr. Kirkopoulos, did you have any comments that you wanted to make to this motion?
Through you, Madam Mayor, Ms. Safani, our Director of Finance, can provide any details council may have, but at the end of the day, this was something that was requested by the province and the ministry specifically to allow us to maximize our potential reimbursement through the gas tax.
All right, I'm going to read the motion. If we have any questions of Ms. Safani, we can include them at that time. I'm sorry, but I can't read this. I'm sorry. I think this is Councillor Reimer. All right. Moved by Councillor Reimer, seconded by Councillor Timmers, that council receive report FN-02-19 for information, that council approve the additional wording highlighted below to the original motion that was passed on September 19th, 2018, to read as follows. Be it resolved that the town of Lincoln supports the U-Link transit system and is committed to provide ongoing annual support to begin January 1st, 2019 in the amount of $289,779, and that this comes off a well-received transit pilot for the entire 2018 operational year that had a cost of $145,000 for 2018, and that the town of Lincoln agrees to receiving and being responsible for the dedicated gas tax funds from the province of Ontario for the U-Link transit system. Councillors, are there any questions to the motion? There being none, your pleasure on the motion. Those in favor? There are none opposed. The motion is carried. All right. Now, we have no information items. We have no confidential items. I think there's a note. All right. I have a motion to approve one bylaw. All right. I have a motion moved by Councillor Timmers and seconded by Councillor Reimer that leave be given to approve the following bylaw, Bylaw 2019-01, a bylaw to adopt an interim control bylaw under Section 38 of the Planning Act regarding cannabis cultivation. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to read Section 3, Parts A and B, so that you are absolutely clear what this bylaw says. Section A. Cannabis production facility means lands, buildings, or structures used for producing, processing, or destroying of cannabis, which is authorized by license issued by the Federal Minister of Health pursuant to the previous Access to Cannabis for Medical Purposes Regulations, SOR 2016-230, to the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act, SC 1996, C-19, as amended from time to time, or any successor thereto. This includes micro-cultivation, standard cultivation, and nursery licenses issued under the current Government of Canada Cannabis Regulations, SOR 2018-144, that are enabled by the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act, the Food and Drugs Act, and the Cannabis Act. Section B. If any provision or requirement of this bylaw or the application thereof to any person shall to any extent be held invalid or unenforceable, the remainder of this bylaw or the application of such provision or requirements to all persons other than those to which it is held to be invalid or unenforceable shall not be affected thereby, and each provision and requirement of this bylaw shall be separately valid and enforceable to the fullest extent permitted by law. Are there any questions? All those in favor, your pleasure on the motion, all those in favor, none opposed, the motion is carried. All right, and a motion to confirm the proceedings of the council meeting. I have a motion moved by Councillor Mikulik and seconded by Councillor McPherson that leave be given to introduce bylaw 2019-02 to adopt, confirm, and ratify matters dealt with by council resolution, that bylaw 2019-02 be passed, and that the mayor and clerk sign and seal the said bylaw. Pleasure on the motion. All of those in favor, the motion is carried, none opposed. And I have a motion moved by Councillor Pachariva and seconded by Councillor Brunet that special council on January 7th, 2019 be adjourned. Your pleasure on the motion. Those in favor, none opposed, and the motion is carried. Motion to adjourn. I'm sorry?
What time do you want to recess until?
Oh,
6:30? Why don't you do
well, I thought
6:45?
we're starting a Councilors, we're going to reconvene for our next meeting at 6:45. Okay, 6:45.